What if the woman Prince Harry gave up a kingdom for just demanded $150 million to stay silent? A sudden silence had fallen over Montecito. The stillness, though invisible, crackled with a storm of whispers, quiet glances, and buzzing phone screens across the globe. Then, with the force of a seismic tremor, it landed. Headlines flooded the internet like a tsunami. Meghan Markle demands $150 million divorce settlement from Prince Harry, tied to rumors of cheating. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For many, it felt like déjà vu. Yet another twist in the ever-unfolding royal saga of the Sussexes. But this time, the tone was different. This wasn't a tabloid rumor buried under clickbait headlines. This was precise, calculated, and sharp. And above all, it came with the unmistakable stench of power play. To understand the gravity of what's being alleged, one must step back from the Instagram-perfect couple we've been sold and look beneath the curated interviews and Netflix specials. What's beginning to unfold isn't just a story of marital breakdown or betrayal. It's a high-stakes legal, financial, and reputational war with potentially irreversible consequences for Prince Harry, for Meghan Markle, and even for the wider royal institution that has fought to distance itself from the pair. It starts with a whisper that grew too loud to ignore. According to sources close to the situation, Meghan Markle allegedly issued a chilling ultimatum to Prince Harry. Pay up, to the tune of $150 million, or face the kind of public unraveling that no title or trust fund could ever cushion. The claim? Harry had been unfaithful. The threat? Full exposure, dragging their private lives into a legal and media storm that would make their exit from royal life look tame in comparison. What's more, this demand didn't come in a flurry of rage or heartbreak. Insiders say it came through intermediaries, through legal drafts, and cold strategic correspondence. There were no tears, no pleas, just business. A message delivered as cleanly as any contract. Pay or pay the price. But here's the twist. Whether or not Prince Harry actually cheated, and we will examine that alleged affair in depth later in the video, may not even matter. What matters is that Meghan, according to these leaks, used that accusation as leverage in what some are now calling the most expensive and manipulative royal divorce threat in modern history. And this isn't coming from the usual gossip columns. Several attorneys familiar with Hollywood royalty disputes have confirmed that settlements in this financial stratosphere don't just come out of emotion. They come from preparation. They come from years of positioning, brand building, and documentation. They come with files, legal teams, and reputational insurance. That's where this story picks up momentum. Because while the public has seen Meghan's side carefully curated through interviews, documentaries, and press statements, the version now surfacing paints a far more aggressive image. One where Meghan is not just a misunderstood outsider, but a highly strategic operator willing to put her former prince into checkmate. And then comes the palace, often silent, often composed, but not this time. The allegations, it appears, have triggered a quiet fury behind the gates of Buckingham Palace. Emergency meetings were reportedly called. Advisors scrambled, not because they care about the romantic ups and downs of Harry and Meghan, but because $150 million isn't just a number. It's a symbol of control, and a threat to everything the monarchy thought it had distanced itself from when Harry and Meghan stepped away. For years, the palace has fought to keep its hands clean of Sussex drama. But now the potential for Harry's finances, royal funds, and confidential agreements to be dragged into open court means that the crown could once again be tethered to the couple they tried to exile from relevance. And Meghan? For her part, she has said nothing. No public comments. No clarifications. But the silence is telling. Because her silence leaves room for only two interpretations. Either she's playing a game of calculated restraint, or she knows she's already won. Meanwhile, Prince Harry has been described as spiraling. Those close to him say he never imagined it would come to this. That the very person he gave up his royal life for could now turn their relationship into a $150 million negotiation. That the fairy tale they built, marketed, and monetized together might end with lawyers instead of love. And in this story, that's only the beginning. Because woven into this tale is more than just a messy divorce or a celebrity feud. What's at stake is trust, not just between two people, but in the institutions around them. Trust in the monarchy, in media, in marriage. Trust in whether truth matters at all when power, money, and public image become weapons. As we dig into the chapters ahead, we'll uncover alleged recordings, mysterious meetings, financial motives, and the hidden dynamics of a marriage that once captured the world's imagination. We'll hear from insiders, trace the paper trail, and dive into the psychological warfare that some believe has defined Harry and Meghan's relationship since the very beginning. But for now, we start where all great scandals do, with a single decision that changed everything. A moment where someone crossed a line, a threat made not in anger, but in purpose, and a prince who, after losing a kingdom, now faces losing what's left of his peace. Is Meghan Markle truly the villain in this story, or just the better strategist? Did Prince Harry actually betray his vows, or is he being cornered by someone who mastered the art of perception? Those are the questions we'll try to answer. But one thing is clear, this is no ordinary breakup. This is warfare, royal, strategic, and very, very expensive. And so, the world waits, watching, speculating, and dissecting every movement. Not because they simply enjoy royal gossip, but because the stakes are now higher than ever. This isn't just about love turned sour. This is about the unraveling of a globally influential partnership, one whose foundation was meticulously crafted in the public eye. It was Harry and Meghan against the world, or so the narrative led many to believe. But as the tapes begin to surface, legal drafts leak, and whispers become loud enough to reach every news cycle, the mask of unity begins to crack. The rumors of Prince Harry cheating weren't just dismissed in private. According to some insiders, Meghan had been sitting on this information, or at least the narrative of it, for some time. Whether she believed the allegations or not seemed irrelevant. What mattered was how they could be used. And when it came time to strike, the conditions were optimal. With their brand under scrutiny, media attention fading post-Netflix and Spotify dramas, and their public image suffering blow after blow, Meghan may have seen the perfect opportunity to redefine the power dynamic. The figure of $150 million wasn't random. It represented more than wealth. It represented leverage. Within hours of the leak, legal circles began buzzing. High-powered attorneys who typically only dealt with celebrities and political figures were suddenly discussing this royal fallout as if it were a Fortune 500 merger gone toxic. Word began spreading that Meghan had retained not just one, but multiple legal experts in both California and New York. Why two coasts? One theory suggests it was to control narrative reach in both Hollywood media and East Coast financial press. If true, it reveals a level of premeditation that goes far beyond a reactive spouse seeking justice. This wasn't about emotion. It was about execution. Meanwhile, Harry found himself in an unfamiliar role, cornered, outmaneuvered, and dangerously isolated. Friends reportedly tried reaching him, only to find his phone lines blocked, his schedule blank, and his mind consumed. Publicly, he still smiled. But those close to him saw something else: fear. Not the fear of losing a wife, but of losing control. The one thing Harry thought he reclaimed when he left the royal family, his autonomy, was now slipping through his fingers again, only this time at the hands of someone he once believed stood beside him in solidarity. But who's really pulling the strings? Some sources hint that this isn't just Meghan acting alone. The phrase financial architects has surfaced, allegedly a small, elite group of Meghan's closest advisors who helped her build Archewell, secure interviews, and manage the couple's public narrative. Now, whispers suggest those same architects may have pivoted their energy towards securing her future, even if it meant detonating Harry's. It's a theory that chills the spine. The very team that built their brand as a couple may now be dismantling it from within. And then there's the deeper irony. For all of Meghan's critiques of the British monarchy as an institution that dehumanizes its members and trades privacy for public performance, she's allegedly employing those same tools in reverse, turning personal pain into public currency, strategically using timing, optics, and silence to let the media do her bidding. And when necessary, applying legal force to remind everyone that image is everything and control over that image is priceless. On the other hand, Harry isn't innocent in the public's eyes. While the cheating allegations remain unverified, they've done enough damage just by existing. Rumors alone can shift public perception, especially when they involve a royal figure already portrayed by tabloids as impulsive and emotionally reactive. His past interviews, his book, and his documented mental health battles now serve as weapons against him. His vulnerability, once seen as bravery, is now recast by some as weakness, a flaw Meghan may have seen, and some believe exploited. This is where the psychological warfare begins to manifest. It's not just about courtrooms and cash. It's about identity, public sympathy, and narrative dominance. Meghan has always been a master at seizing control of the narrative, whether through a well-timed interview or a tearful moment on screen. Harry, on the other hand, has often seemed uncomfortable in the spotlight unless speaking about trauma. That asymmetry, her comfort with performance, his comfort with confession, may now be clashing in a way neither anticipated. At the heart of this unfolding battle lies a painful question. Was it ever real? Was the marriage a genuine love story derailed by fame and pressure, or was it a carefully constructed partnership from the very beginning, built more on optics than on intimacy? This is the question burning through tabloids and private WhatsApp chats alike. And while no outsider can truly know what exists between two people behind closed doors, the public spectacle unfolding seems to suggest that what began in passion may be ending in strategy. And if Meghan's demands are indeed tied to an alleged betrayal, we must ask, how did it come to this? Could it be that Harry, exhausted by the burdens of being the royal rebel, sought comfort elsewhere? Could it be that Meghan, seeing the brand lose traction, decided to reassert her independence in the most financially secure way possible? Or could it all be an illusion, fabricated, exaggerated, and leveraged not out of spite but out of necessity? We live in an age where perception can be more powerful than truth, where a single leak, tweet, or headline can rewrite years of public image in minutes. And in the case of Harry and Meghan, perception has always been their currency. They traded in narratives, in exclusives, in symbolism. But now, that currency is crashing. And with $150 million on the line, the scramble to protect what remains is likely to get uglier. What's perhaps most disturbing is that neither side seems fully in control anymore. With legal documents allegedly leaked, allies on both sides speaking out anonymously, and the internet dissecting every micro-expression from old interviews, this story has spiraled into something no PR strategist could contain. The mess is out in the open, the silence between them louder than any statement. The perfect couple, once seen as modern royalty redefining tradition, now appears to be locked in a tactical standoff worthy of a political thriller. And we're just getting started. Because in the chapters ahead, we will pull back the curtain on what really transpired behind the scenes of this royal implosion. The secret legal meetings, the whispers of wiretapped calls, the dossier Meghan allegedly kept of Harry's mistakes, and that one voice recording that could dismantle every lie told so far or confirm the worst. But for now, the question that hangs heavy in the air is simple. Not whether they'll divorce, not whether Harry cheated, but whether the love that once burned so bright was ever strong enough to withstand the weight of ambition, betrayal, and control. That, more than any number or headline, is the real heartbreak of this story. And it's the heartbreak we'll explore next. It didn't begin with a fight. There was no screaming, no slamming doors, no cameras catching them leaving separate restaurants. There were no paparazzi shots of a suitcase at the gate. Instead, what emerged was far more unsettling: an email, neatly worded, discreetly sent, addressed not directly to Prince Harry, but to his legal representatives. The subject line? Private resolution proposal. The body of the message? A meticulously crafted demand, a settlement of $150 million in exchange for a swift and non-public divorce. The figure hit like a thunderclap. $150 million. Not $30 million. Not even $75 million. A sum so large that it exceeded Meghan's entire estimated net worth several times over. But this wasn't just about money. It was about leverage, about power, about setting the tone. And the message was clear. Meghan Markle wasn't coming to the table as a victim. She was arriving as a negotiator with demands, documentation, and the threat of nuclear exposure if those demands weren't met. The number itself stunned observers, even in the world of high-net-worth divorce settlements. Industry insiders began calculating just how such a staggering figure could be justified. Analysts pored over their shared properties, the Montecito mansion reportedly worth $14.6 million, the security arrangements, the designer wardrobe costs, the staff payrolls. But none of it added up to $150 million. Then came the deeper context. This wasn't a demand based solely on tangible assets. This was an anticipated payout for future revenue Meghan claimed she would lose as a result of the divorce. brand partnerships, book deals, streaming rights, and speaking engagements, many of which, she allegedly argued, were only viable because of her connection to Harry and the royal story they shared. From a financial perspective, it was a bold but not a logical strategy. Meghan wasn't just asking for what existed, she was demanding compensation for what she claimed she helped build, the Sussex brand. Archewell wasn't just a charity name, it was a media and influence empire, and she wanted her cut before walking away. But here's where the story darkens. According to several sources close to the situation, the $150 million wasn't just about assets or brand equity. Attached to the demand were carefully worded conditions: no media trials, no interviews discussing Harry's infidelity, and, most critically, Meghan's agreement to remain silent about the contents of private conversations, family correspondences, and undisclosed recordings that she allegedly possesses. That's where the word blackmail began to float around. Some insiders said Meghan wasn't blackmailing anyone, she was protecting herself from retaliation. But others weren't so forgiving. One well-placed source with knowledge of the legal back-and-forths described the tone of Meghan's demand letter as menacingly polite. A letter that, if read in isolation, sounded like any other divorce negotiation. But read with the knowledge of what Meghan might reveal, the entire context shifted. The timing was equally telling. The email was reportedly sent just days after a surge in speculation about Harry's alleged affair. Whether the rumors were planted, coincidental, or legitimate remains unclear. What is clear is that Meghan seized the moment. By aligning her demand with the narrative of betrayal, she added moral weight to the monetary ask. She wasn't just walking away from a marriage, she was extracting justice. And yet, the question remains, why now? Some believe Meghan had been waiting for the right moment to move. With their public image deteriorating and media sympathy shifting, she may have concluded that her stock was peaking. If she left now, with the cheating rumors fresh and public fatigue growing, she could position herself as the wrong party. And if she waited any longer, she risked becoming irrelevant, or worse, disliked. Others point to internal tensions that had been festering for months. Private disagreements over money, brand direction, and parenting styles allegedly turned into explosive arguments. Meghan, once willing to play the long game, may have realized that her personal and professional future was more secure without Harry, not emotionally, strategically. And so, the $150 million ultimatum landed like a grenade in Harry's world. Advisors, caught off guard, reportedly urged him to keep the matter quiet. Not just because of the cost, but because of the optics. If it became known that Harry was being asked to pay a king's ransom to avoid personal humiliation, it would undo every public move he had made since leaving the royal family. His brand, rooted in honesty, vulnerability, and the pursuit of independence, would be shattered. But silence was not a luxury Harry could afford. Behind the scenes, his lawyers pushed back. They questioned the valuation of future earnings. They requested proof of damages. They demanded a confidentiality clause in return, one that would keep Meghan from revealing any private data, even to her team. Meghan's side, allegedly, declined the clause outright. At this point, it was no longer about marriage or divorce. It was about control, about who would write the final chapter of their story. And while Meghan appeared prepared, even eager, to move on with financial security and narrative dominance, Harry was reportedly frozen, caught between a quiet capitulation that would save face or a fight that could destroy them both. The palace, when informed of the demand, reacted with urgency. While they had long washed their hands of Harry's decisions, the sheer size of the sum raised alarms. If Meghan's legal team managed to position the settlement as partially tied to royal funds or inherited assets, it could spark a public outcry. In the UK, where the monarchy is still taxpayer-adjacent, every pound attached to Meghan is political dynamite. And what about the children? Archie and Lilibet were not excluded from the financial proposal. Meghan's camp, according to sources, framed their inclusion as a necessary protection, ensuring they would continue to live a lifestyle befitting their name and lineage. But critics viewed it differently. They saw it as another tactic, a way to tie Meghan's future earnings and her settlement demands to the value of her children's royal status. Some speculated that Meghan may have intended to challenge royal titles in court. Others believed she was preparing for a media tour centered on single motherhood, betrayal, and survival. Either way, the $150 million wasn't just money, it was a license to control the narrative across all platforms: legal, media, social. What's more chilling is the efficiency with which the demand was delivered. According to insiders, it wasn't a chaotic flurry of rage. Meghan's legal documentation was described as bulletproof. Every figure was accounted for. Every clause phrased with intention. Even the non-disclosure agreements were layered with contingencies, ensuring that if Harry spoke first, Meghan's silence would be nullified. This wasn't the product of a spontaneous breakdown. This was the execution of a long-held strategy. And while public opinion was still divided, some blaming Harry for driving Meghan to this point, others calling it the most public cash grab in modern history. The private stakes had escalated. What would Harry do? He could fight, contest every figure, risk depositions, risk leaked emails and recorded calls, risk it all, or he could pay, quietly, generously, and accept the public shame as the cost of peace. In the next section, we'll explore what that decision could cost him, not just in dollars, but in dignity. Because as the ultimatum stands, $150 million isn't just the price of separation, it's the ransom placed on Harry's freedom, reputation, and the final shred of control he thought he had left. And what's more, it may not even be the full amount Meghan wants. The silence from Buckingham Palace in moments of controversy has always been strategic. Carefully curated statements, or more often, no statement at all, have been their weapon of choice for centuries. But behind those fortified gates, where discretion meets dynasty, the real conversations are always more urgent, more fractured, and more desperate than the press ever sees. And in the aftermath of Meghan Markle's $150 million demand to Prince Harry, accompanied by implied threats of public exposure, the palace walls didn't just tremble. They nearly cracked. Sources close to the palace describe a scene of controlled chaos. The moment word reached royal advisors about the ultimatum Meghan had issued, via email, through her legal intermediaries, a red flag was hoisted. While the palace had long sought to distance itself from Harry's affairs, this situation was different. It wasn't just a marital dispute. It was a potential institutional crisis. One that had the capacity to drag the monarchy back into the media inferno it had narrowly escaped after the Sussexes' 2020 exit. The meeting, according to a royal insider who spoke on strict condition of anonymity, was convened within 24 hours of the email leak. It was an emergency legal and communications session involving King Charles's senior aides, a select group of legal advisors, and the inner circle of palace media handlers. The location wasn't announced to even mid-level staff. No official schedules were posted. But every car that pulled into the private entrance carried a face tied to the crown's reputation machine. At the heart of the discussion, risk mitigation. What exactly did Meghan have in her possession? Were there private correspondences that could harm the crown? Had Harry, in his emotional volatility, shared sensitive royal details during pillow talk that Meghan could now weaponize? Was it possible that audio existed, conversations, voicemails, private video calls, that, if leaked, could send shockwaves through the monarchy and undermine their very legitimacy? These weren't hypothetical questions. They were action items. The first order of business was containment. Efforts were made, behind the scenes, to reach out quietly to Harry, not to interfere in his divorce, but to gauge the extent of what Meghan might be threatening to disclose. Harry, reportedly, did not respond directly. One of his longtime aides, however, reportedly conveyed a message to the palace. "You don't understand. It's already gone too far." The tone of that statement sent shivers across the table. Charles, as both father and monarch, was described as visibly shaken, not necessarily by the financial demand, but by the looming threat of reputational destruction. In recent years, the monarchy had faced its share of scandals, from Prince Andrew's catastrophic Epstein fallout to mounting criticism over colonial legacies. But this was different. This came from within, from blood, from the son he once hoped would modernize the monarchy. Behind closed doors, Charles reportedly asked a chilling question: "What if she has tapes?" That sentence, uttered in the presence of his advisors, changed the energy of the room. Suddenly, this wasn't a family issue. It was a national threat. If Meghan did possess private recordings, and if those recordings included disparaging comments made by royal family members, personal admissions, or strategic conversations around the Sussexes' departure, the monarchy could face a legitimacy crisis not seen since the Diana tapes or the Queen's subdued response to her death. At this point, the palace began drawing up scenarios. In one folder, labeled Public Relations Response Strategy A, advisors began crafting draft statements. These would be carefully worded phrases prepared in the event Meghan or her team went public. The goal was to sound empathetic, restrained, and legally noncommittal. A second folder, Legal Contingency B, involved liaising with external firms specializing in reputation management and litigation against malicious leaks. What few people know is that there exists a kind of shadow cabinet within the royal structure, not elected, not official, but influential. This group, comprised of ex-MI5 consultants, private investigators, and crisis communication professionals, operates in silence and reports to no one but the monarch and the Lord Chamberlain. They are activated in moments like this, when traditional royal protocol is insufficient to handle a threat. One of their first moves, allegedly, was to begin mapping Meghan's digital network. Who had she been communicating with? What press contacts had she maintained since her Oprah interview? Were there traces of audio or video files being shared across encrypted apps? Within 48 hours, a map of her public relations ecosystem was compiled. Names, firms, lawyers, publicists, and journalists she had historically favored. The most disturbing realization was this: Meghan didn't need to release the tapes herself. All she had to do was leak their existence, suggest their contents, and let public imagination do the rest, which is precisely why the palace's next move was not offensive, but preventative. They began informal talks with key UK and US media outlets. Not to suppress the story, they knew they couldn't, but to plant legal red lines. Editors were quietly informed that any material involving illegally obtained recordings would be met with full-scale litigation. The message was clear: publishing Meghan's potential evidence wouldn't just be scandalous, it would be dangerous. Yet in the midst of this media chessboard, there was still the human element. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense pragmatism, reportedly urged Charles to cut ties once and for all. "Let Harry handle his mess," she is quoted as saying during an internal debrief. "The more we chase this, the more power we give them." Her voice, though forceful, clashed with others in the room who feared the damage could extend far beyond tabloid gossip. And William? He was present for at least one of the crisis meetings. His demeanor, according to sources, was icy. Not toward Meghan, but toward Harry. It was clear that the older brother, already burned by the Oprah interview, saw this as confirmation that the Sussex chapter was not merely an emotional departure, but a ticking time bomb they failed to disarm years ago. But amid all the plotting and protocol, one thing became apparent: Harry was alone. Meghan had her legal team, her advisors, her strategy. The palace had their centuries-old infrastructure. But Harry? He was isolated, trapped between two forces he no longer fully trusted. Some aides attempted to reach him through mutual friends. Others suggested neutral mediators. But the sense was growing that Harry had no roadmap and no escape. And so, in that sealed room deep inside the palace, the so-called panic room of royal affairs, the question evolved from "what can we do?" to "how bad will this get?" No one had an answer. One advisor reportedly summarized the situation in stark terms: "It's no longer about whether Meghan leaks. It's about when, and what it destroys when she does." As the meeting drew to a close, Charles is said to have stood up, slowly, quietly, and stared out the window toward the garden where Harry and Meghan had once walked freely during happier visits. The room fell silent as he said only this: "We welcomed her, and now she threatens to end us." No one responded. There was nothing left to say. But as they all filed out, documents tucked under arms, security detail trailing behind, it was clear the monarchy had just crossed another threshold. One where tradition no longer protected them. One where their greatest threat was no longer a foreign power, a scandalous prince, or a salacious press. Their greatest threat now sat beneath a California sun, holding cards no one expected her to play. And she hadn't even made her first move. For a marriage so deeply embedded in the global spotlight, rumors were inevitable. But there's a difference between background noise and a bombshell, and what Meghan Markle dropped was nothing short of a calculated detonation. At the center of the $150 million divorce ultimatum was one explosive allegation: infidelity. She claimed Prince Harry had been unfaithful. And in the world of high-profile relationships, few accusations carry more emotional and financial weight than that. But the real question wasn't just if Harry cheated. It was why Meghan chose to make the accusation now, and how she planned to use it. Sources close to the situation say the allegations were never screamed in anger across a table. There was no confrontation, no dramatic scene of betrayal. Instead, The accusation was introduced quietly, buried within legal correspondence, framed not as a personal grievance, but as a pivotal justification for financial recompense. In legal language, this was a strategic term. It wasn't just about being hurt. It was about being wronged in a way that justified the staggering price tag attached to her exit. But what fueled the claim? Where did the story of Prince Harry's alleged affair begin? Speculation suggests that Meghan's team may have compiled circumstantial evidence over several months. Travel inconsistencies, ambiguous messages, late-night disappearances masked as charity meetings. Some claim she even confronted Harry privately months earlier, but chose not to act immediately. Why wait? Because she was timing her hand. A strategic move, not an emotional outburst. The alleged woman in question remains unidentified publicly, but whispers have circulated across celebrity gossip pages and royal forums. She's rumored to be someone within the Sussex's orbit, possibly a professional acquaintance from one of their projects, possibly a figure Meghan never entirely trusted. Observers point to a series of photos taken at a sustainability event in San Francisco last year, where Harry was seen laughing with a brunette woman in a moment some described as too comfortable. The woman, reportedly a tech entrepreneur, was later photographed leaving a private dinner hosted by Archwell Partners. She was never seen publicly with Harry again, but Meghan, some say, never forgot her face. Still, no evidence has surfaced proving an affair. No explicit texts. No photographs beyond what could be interpreted through subjective lenses. And yet, Meghan didn't need proof in the traditional sense. In a high-stakes divorce negotiation, especially involving public figures, the power lies in perception. The mere suggestion of infidelity, paired with even a sliver of ambiguous behavior, was enough to turn the tables in Meghan's favor. And there's precedent for this. In past celebrity divorces, infidelity, proven or not, has often been used to bolster financial claims. The logic is simple. If one party is portrayed as the victim of betrayal, the court and the public are more likely to sympathize with their demands. Meghan's team knew this. They didn't need to confirm the cheating. They only needed to present enough of a shadow to make Harry flinch and to make the public wonder. Harry's response to the accusation has not been publicly recorded. Privately, insiders say he was furious and stunned, not because he felt wrongly accused, but because he saw the move for what it was, a calculated assault on his moral credibility. For someone who had spent the last several years reshaping his identity as a principled, emotionally open man of integrity, the accusation landed like a dagger. It wasn't just his marriage on the line, it was his reputation. It's important to note that the cheating accusation didn't come out of thin air. Long before this latest chapter, critics and commentators often scrutinized Harry's behavior. His time in the military, his past partying escapades, and even certain blurred interactions on royal tours had been dissected with a fine-toothed comb. Meghan may have drawn from that history, carefully reconstructing a pattern that would give her claim more gravity. And then there was the media's role. Almost instantly after the $150 million figure and cheating allegation leaked, royal commentators seized on old footage and interviews. A smirk during a podcast, a glance exchanged on stage. Theories emerged. Some were ridiculous. Others, uncomfortably plausible. Meghan didn't need to push the narrative herself. The media and public did it for her, spinning their own versions of Harry's alleged betrayal and amplifying the very perception she needed to justify her exit terms. But what if the cheating story wasn't true? There are those within Harry's circle who say it was entirely fabricated. That Meghan, aware of the damage it could cause, used the idea of infidelity not as a cry for help, but as a legal lever. These people argue that Meghan's mastery of public sympathy, honed over years of interviews and appearances, allowed her to frame the narrative in a way that cast her as the dignified wife choosing silence over scandal, while leaving Harry to fend off invisible rumors. From a psychological standpoint, the move was genius. Meghan didn't publicly accuse Harry. She didn't sit for an interview. She didn't name the woman. She allowed the idea to take root in whispers and headlines. That allowed her to remain above the fray, stoic, silent, hurt but graceful, while simultaneously gaining the upper hand. By the time Harry's team could respond, the damage was already in motion. And that leads us to perhaps the darkest possibility of all, that Meghan may have prepared this card years in advance. Several observers now suggest that Meghan, understanding the volatility of her relationship with Harry and the unpredictability of royal drama, may have begun building a divorce plan early on. The idea wouldn't be shocking in Hollywood or political marriages. Many such unions include prearranged media strategies, financial protections, and contingency planning. If Meghan kept a file, a collection of texts, photos, timelines, and ambiguous interactions that could one day serve her legal interests, it would explain how seamlessly she moved from accusation to demand. This wasn't the reaction of someone blindsided. It was the reaction of someone ready. Of course, there's a more human explanation as well. That Meghan, after years of feeling unprotected and undermined by both Harry's family and the media, finally reached her breaking point. That she believed, whether rightly or wrongly, that Harry had been unfaithful emotionally if not physically, and used that belief as a justification for everything that followed. Whatever the truth, what remains clear is that the accusation was a turning point. The cheating rumor became the emotional trigger in the legal cannon Meghan had loaded. It changed the stakes, shifted public sentiment, and put Harry in a corner. If he denied the allegation, he risked looking defensive and guilty. If he ignored it, he let the story grow unchallenged. If he counterattacked, he risked escalating into a media war he couldn't win. And somewhere in California, Meghan waited. Waited as media debated her motives. Waited as public opinion slowly began to tilt. Waited as Harry struggled with the impossible task of defending himself without further humiliating the very woman threatening to destroy him. Because in this chess match, Meghan didn't need to shout. She only needed to move her queen into position. And now, whether the betrayal was real or merely perceived, Harry had no choice but to play the game she set in motion. Next, we'll dive into the paper trail, the legal letters, the private notes, the emails exchanged between Meghan's team and Harry's attorneys that reveal just how calculated this entire saga may be. If you thought a divorce was about emotion, prepare to see what it looks like when it's engineered like a corporate takedown. When the fog of emotion is stripped away from any high-stakes separation, what remains is paper. Cold, calculated, documented evidence. In the case of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's explosive fallout, that paper trail may prove to be the most powerful weapon in what is now turned into a strategic war. Not only does it contain a financial breakdown and legal positioning, it allegedly charts the entire timeline of Meghan's premeditated exit from the marriage, culminating in the now infamous $150 million demand. According to insiders familiar with the legal exchanges between Meghan's and Harry's teams, this was not a last-minute scramble. This wasn't a woman pushed to the edge, suddenly reacting out of desperation. The documentation suggests months, possibly years of foresight. The tone, structure, and detail of her legal communication hint at someone who has been preparing for the possibility of divorce long before it reached a boiling point. The first signal came in the form of a non-confrontational email. Sent from her attorney's office in Los Angeles, it carried the subject line, Terms of Resolution. Notably, it did not use the word divorce. That was intentional. The email sought to position the proposed financial arrangement as a non-contentious resolution to evolving personal dynamics, laced with legalese and vague emotional references. But embedded in the body of the message were detailed figures. Projected losses, brand valuations, and future potential income from ventures tied to Meghan's name and image. It referenced joint ventures like the Netflix deal, Spotify's collapsed podcast agreement, and pending book projects. The implication was unmistakable. Meghan believed she had earned, or at least built equity in, a machine that had significant long-term value. What stood out to analysts wasn't just the number of line items, it was how meticulously organized they were. Every brand deal had a projected lifespan. Every endorsement opportunity included a revenue forecast. Meghan's financial team had run a full audit on her visibility and reach, accounting for followers, media engagement, and estimated influence. It looked less like a separation request and more like a business merger dissolution. And then came the clause that stunned even hardened legal experts. A stipulation that Harry, in exchange for agreeing to the $150 million settlement, must forfeit any legal objection to Meghan publishing future written or visual content based on her personal experiences, including experiences tied to the royal family. In layman's terms, Meghan wanted carte blanche to tell her story, in her own words, without interference, now or later. Harry's lawyers immediately flagged this clause. It was a trap. Not only could it allow Meghan to go on a global press tour or publish a memoir with complete impunity, it could also pave the way for her to frame Harry and the institution of the monarchy in any narrative she deemed fit. The clause was vague enough to leave the door wide open for reinterpretation, yet precise enough to protect her from legal retaliation. This is where things took a darker turn. Alongside the legal proposal was a sealed addendum, reportedly containing a digital summary of evidence Meghan's team had compiled over the years. While its full contents remain undisclosed, insiders say it included screenshots of text messages exchanged between Meghan and Harry, some of which allegedly showed Harry expressing doubt about his role in the royal family, and others in which he referenced slipping away for a breather. Language Meghan's attorneys could argue as suggestive of secretive behavior. Emails between Meghan and palace aides dating back to her final year in the UK. Some of these emails, it said, highlight how unsupported she felt and document her requests for help regarding media pressure. Though not directly related to the cheating allegations, they serve to reinforce her argument of sustained emotional stress. Handwritten notes from therapy sessions which Meghan claims were contemporaneous to moments of emotional distress. These notes allegedly outline periods where she suspected Harry of dishonesty, felt isolated, and considered an exit strategy for herself and the children. A list of names. Journalists, PR executives, and media figures who had contacted Meghan's team discreetly over the years, seeking scoops, offering sympathetic coverage, or warning her of damaging leaks. The implication was clear. Meghan had a wide net of connections, and she kept meticulous records. One senior legal analyst who was consulted independently after reviewing descriptions of the files commented, "This is less a divorce proceeding and more of a counterintelligence operation." But the documents didn't stop at emotional framing. They went further, into the realm of implied legal threat. Buried deep in one of the documents is what's been described as a nuclear paragraph. A two-line sentence that, according to those familiar with the file, stated, "Should the conditions outlined in this agreement not be met, the undersigned reserves the right to seek recourse through all available public and media channels, as permitted by law." Translated plainly, Meghan was prepared to go public, hard, if her demands weren't met. To Harry's team, this was a red flag wrapped in velvet. The elegance of the sentence did nothing to dull its sharpness. It was, in every sense of the word, a warning. Faced with this documentation, Harry's lawyers found themselves boxed in. Their first instinct was to respond with a counteroffer. A significantly reduced settlement, combined with airtight confidentiality agreements on both sides. Meghan's team rejected the counter. They offered minor tweaks, adjusting language, softening deadlines, but the sum remained fixed, and the threat of public escalation hovered like a sword over the negotiations. Meanwhile, Harry's internal circle began to fracture. Advisors debated over whether to escalate legally or settle quickly and quietly. Some urged him to fight, calling Meghan's move a glorified extortion. Others warned that the longer the process dragged, the more risk it carried, not just financially, but emotionally and reputationally. The longer the press caught wind of the documentation's existence, the more pressure Harry would face to cave. And the press did catch wind. Within weeks, cryptic headlines began surfacing. Sources claim Meghan's legal team has receipts. Private journals and legal threats surfaced behind the scenes of Sussex divorce drama. Though none of the major papers named their sources, the wording bore the hallmarks of information coming from within Meghan's camp. It was a soft rollout, leaking just enough to build tension without revealing too much. This strategy, some believe, was deliberate. Meghan had learned from past media frenzies. If she dumped everything at once, it could backfire. But if she allowed the narrative to simmer, if she let the public wonder what she might reveal, then she maintained the upper hand without firing a single shot. And through it all, Harry remained publicly silent. His silence, however, did not equal ignorance. Sources say he reviewed every page of the documentation with growing dismay. What pained him most was not the money. It was the realization that his marriage had become a game of angles and leverage. That the woman he once trusted implicitly had been documenting their journey with one eye always on the potential fallout. One particularly disturbing detail reportedly brought Harry to tears. According to one insider, Meghan's files included a timeline labeled Narrative Control, with bullet points referencing strategic interview opportunities, planned image shifts, and audience targeting. Dates allegedly aligned with their Oprah interview, Archewell launches, and the release of Harry's memoir. The implication? That their public narrative had been orchestrated more than he'd ever known. Now, faced with legal paperwork that felt more like a manifesto than a divorce agreement, Harry had a decision to make. Settle, pay, and try to rebuild his life quietly? Or fight, risk everything, and possibly lose far more than money? That's where we'll go next, into Harry's mental collapse, his reaction to the betrayal, and the personal fallout that left him, for the first time, entirely unguarded. There are moments in a person's life that shift everything, when the rug isn't just pulled out from under them, but their entire world tilts. According to close friends and former aides, Prince Harry experienced one of those moments the day he read Meghan's final legal notice. It wasn't the number that broke him. It wasn't even the veiled threats, the calculated tone, or the mention of private recordings. It was something far more intimate. The realization that the woman he had risked everything for had quietly been preparing for this separation, meticulously, deliberately, and without his knowledge. Inside the walls of their Montecito estate, a different kind of silence began to take over, one not born out of peace, but a growing emotional vacuum. Harry, always known to wear his heart on his sleeve, began to retreat. Friends who were once welcomed with late-night video calls or spontaneous messages were suddenly met with unread texts and voicemail inboxes that never emptied. His inner circle, once vibrant with advisors, veterans, and longtime confidants, thinned to near nothing. What the public didn't see in those early days after the divorce threat were the signs of a man quietly unraveling. Sources say Harry stopped eating regularly. He dropped weight. He spent entire mornings pacing the property, speaking to no one, phone in hand, but not calling anyone. His days grew erratic. One morning he would dive into managing Archwell with a kind of frantic energy, the next he wouldn't leave the bedroom at all. What was once a disciplined ex-military routine was replaced with chaos and isolation. It wasn't just the betrayal that undid him. It was the depth of the manipulation. According to a former staff member who had served the couple during their time in Frogmore Cottage and then relocated briefly to California during the Archwell rollout, Harry wasn't just blindsided, he was gutted. The staffer described a man who had, for years, viewed Meghan as his compass, his protector, and his purpose. To discover that she had been planning for separation for far longer than he realized shattered the foundation of his emotional security. The infamous phrase, "I never thought she'd do this," was reportedly said during a closed-door meeting with his legal team, shortly after receiving Meghan's evidence packet and financial demand. One witness said Harry stared at the document, shaking his head repeatedly before murmuring those words. They weren't angry. They weren't loud. They were flat, quiet, almost detached. That's when everyone in the room knew this was more than a legal conflict. It was a psychological collapse in progress. Harry's vulnerability has always been visible to the public. From his confessions about his mental health struggles to the raw pages of his memoir, he's never been the type to hide his scars. But this moment was different. This wasn't just about his mother's death or the tension with his father. This was about the one person he believed chose him over the crown. And now, she had turned him into a client. Privately, Harry began expressing guilt. Guilt that he had ignored the warnings from family members, William chief among them, who had quietly voiced concerns about Meghan's ambitions. Guilt that he had distanced himself from old friends, trusted aides, and even cousins to protect a marriage that may have been laced with ulterior motives. He began replaying conversations, revisiting timelines, asking out loud questions no one could answer. Was she ever really on my side? In one particularly emotional instance, captured by a close friend who later spoke to a royal journalist off-record, Harry reportedly broke down in tears while reading one of Meghan's narrative control planning documents. The bullet points outlining their coordinated public appearances, the same ones he thought had been born out of shared vision, suddenly looked like strategic media manipulation. The friend described Harry's face as ashen, and his voice empty to fight. But it wasn't only personal betrayal that crushed him. It was the professional collapse that followed. With news of the legal fallout slowly leaking to the press, brand partners began calling. Meetings were postponed. Joint ventures paused. Archwell employees, some of whom had already been dealing with uncertainty, quietly began applying for jobs elsewhere. What had started as a media empire built on empowerment and transformation now seemed mired in scandal and distrust. Internally, the Archwell office shifted its tone. Memos were sent with cautious language. Staff were instructed to avoid discussing the divorce outside of approved channels. Legal departments began double-checking NDAs. Senior staff, particularly those tied closely to Meghan's side of the organization, became noticeably scarce in their communication with Harry. He wasn't just being left by Meghan. He was being abandoned by the very machinery they'd built together. The worst part? Harry reportedly began to doubt himself. Friends noted changes in his language. He stopped referring to Meghan with hope or affection and started speaking in half-sentences, unfinished thoughts. Phrases like, "Maybe I pushed her too hard," or "I should have seen the signs," became common. In moments of vulnerability, he would even express concern for how his children would view him when the dust settled. Because this wasn't just about losing a partner. It was about losing the identity he had built around that partnership. Therapy, which had long been part of Harry's healing journey, resumed with new urgency. But even therapists, insiders say, struggled to penetrate the numbness he carried in those early weeks. For someone who had once seen speaking out as liberation, he now saw silence as safety. And that silence fed the headlines. As Meghan's narrative slowly leaked, one press contact at a time, Harry's silence began to look like confirmation. And yet, there was a flicker of something else. Not anger, not revenge, but quiet defiance. Sources close to Harry say that even as he broke down emotionally, he began compiling his own documents. Not to attack Meghan, but to protect himself. Emails he'd saved, letters between him and his father, voice notes from private conversations. His goal wasn't retaliation. It was insurance. A shield should Meghan ever follow through on her veiled threats. One source said Harry referred to this private archive as his anchor, not because it could destroy Meghan, but because it reminded him that he wasn't crazy, that he wasn't imagining the manipulation, that he hadn't lost touch with reality. Still, the collapse lingered. In the weeks that followed, Harry reportedly withdrew from several public appearances. One planned virtual panel was canceled without explanation. A scheduled charity gala appearance in New York was scrapped days before he was to board a plane. His absence raised eyebrows, but those in the know understood what was happening behind the scenes. This wasn't just about recovery. It was about reckoning. Reckoning with the fact that he gave up a kingdom for a woman who, some now believe, saw the crown as a stepping stone, not a shared sacrifice. And yet, perhaps the most painful realization came not from legal documents, not from Meghan's email, not from the leaked evidence. It came from a single sentence in one of the recorded therapy reflections Meghan had allegedly shared with her team, a sentence Harry stumbled upon while reviewing the documents with his attorneys. "I had to protect myself, even if it meant protecting myself from him." That line, reportedly handwritten, wasn't damning in the legal sense. But emotionally, it was the final blow. Because for Harry, it reframed everything. He hadn't just lost Meghan's trust. He had never truly had it to begin with. To understand how Meghan Markle moved so swiftly, so surgically, and so thoroughly in her legal offensive, one must look beyond the palace walls and across the Atlantic to California. Not the sun-drenched beaches of Santa Barbara or the red carpets of Los Angeles, but the back offices of Beverly Hills law firms, private members' clubs tucked away in the hills, and the executive lounges of streaming giants. It was here, in this complex web of attorneys, brand strategists, celebrity fixers, and crisis managers, that Meghan found what some are now calling her true power base. While Harry came from an institution rooted in ancient tradition and inherited duty, Meghan emerged from the media-saturated world of entertainment, a place where relationships are transactional, appearances are currency, and narratives are built, manipulated, and sold. And in California, she had quietly built a formidable alliance. Long before the divorce threat was sent, Meghan had spent years cultivating relationships with some of the most powerful and discreet legal minds on the West Coast. According to multiple insiders, her legal counsel didn't consist of a single attorney, but rather a hybrid team, divided between matrimonial law experts, entertainment contract specialists, and public relations legal consultants. It was a strategy designed not just for defense, but for offense. Each attorney reportedly had a designated role, from asset negotiation to image protection. One name that surfaced in legal circles, though unconfirmed officially, is a high-profile Los Angeles divorce attorney known for representing A-list celebrities in settlements often exceeding 9 figures. This particular lawyer is known for operating quietly, avoiding press, and assembling multidisciplinary teams that include forensic accountants, branding experts, and digital privacy advisors. The fact that Meghan had such representation hinted at long-term planning. This was not a lawyer one calls during a moment of crisis. This was someone you retain early, quietly, and purposefully. But the lawyers were just one layer. Behind Meghan stood an intricate machinery of Hollywood influence, the very ecosystem she had embedded herself in during and after her royal exit. publicists with deep ties to media outlets, streaming executives with multi-year relationships, brand consultants who helped craft her image from American princess to independent mother. These weren't random allies. They were the same people responsible for guiding the public stories of scandal-laced celebrities and rehabilitating the images of fallen stars. One source with experience in celebrity reputation management described Meghan's network as clean, elite, and ruthless. According to this expert, what made Meghan's influence so unique wasn't just who she knew, it was how she orchestrated them. She doesn't need to make calls herself, the source said. She knows which person to signal and when to trigger a reaction that moves the entire media landscape by morning. And then there were the tech connections. During her time building Archewell, Meghan reportedly formed tight connections with Silicon Valley figures, women in leadership roles at social media platforms, media investors, and digital security firms. These relationships weren't just friendly. They were strategic. If you're going to wage war in the age of information, knowing how to control data, monitor leaks, and suppress damaging content online is as critical as having legal protection in court. Some reports suggest that Meghan contracted a media analytics firm to study how various narratives surrounding her and Harry performed online. Which words got traction? Which images fueled sympathy? Which stories derailed or amplified? According to one insider who once worked briefly as a consultant for a related PR firm, Meghan's team understood the digital battlefield better than most political campaigns. They know what time to drop a story, which platforms trend fastest, and how to create a 3-day media arc from a single headline, the consultant explained. When the divorce threat became real, that machine was already warmed up. Unlike Harry, who had largely relied on a mix of palace-adjacent advisors, former military contacts, and a few nonprofit veterans, Meghan's camp operated like a stealth agency. They controlled the release of key leaks to strategically chosen outlets, ensuring sympathetic framing. Notably, when early whispers of the $150 million figure hit the public, they didn't appear on fringe gossip blogs. They landed on well-read, polished platforms that cater to upper-middle-class professionals, places where readers are accustomed to digesting divorce stories involving billionaires and studio heads, not royals. That placement wasn't accidental. It was surgical. The press response was shaped in a way that framed Meghan as both empowered and wronged. Articles included anonymous quotes from sources close to Meghan, who painted her not as vengeful, but as exhausted. Not greedy, but protective. One particularly telling phrase made its way across several headlines. She didn't want it to come to this. That quote, repeated by multiple outlets within days of each other, was a clear indication of PR coordination, a signal that Meghan's team had chosen its emotional through line. And yet, behind this curated narrative was another layer, more hidden, more manipulative. There are whispers now that Meghan's camp may have hired, or at least consulted with, 2 former intelligence consultants who previously worked with political campaigns and Fortune 500 executives. Their job? To preemptively identify reputational threats, map out potential enemy narratives, and provide reputational simulations, detailed blueprints of how the story might play out in public if certain documents leaked, if Harry fought back, or if the royal family intervened. If true, it would explain the precision of Meghan's movements. Why she knew when to release information. Why she appeared always one step ahead of Harry's team. Why every leak, every anonymous quote, every legal clause seemed tailored not just to protect her, but to shape a wider perception. This, in essence, was California power. Not the glitz of the red carpet, but the boardroom cloud of lawyers, tech firms, and media moguls. And Harry? He wasn't just facing a soon-to-be ex-wife. He was up against a machine. One royal expert, who previously wrote biographies on both Princess Diana and Queen Elizabeth, put it bluntly. Meghan may have married into royalty, but she brought with her the tools of Hollywood. And right now, Harry is discovering just how devastating those tools can be when turned against him. This is where the story ceases to feel like a personal conflict and begins to resemble a corporate takedown. Every move from Meghan's team. From the polished language in the divorce proposal to the controlled media coverage, appears less like reactive damage control and more like a playbook executed to perfection. It's important to recognize that none of this is illegal. In fact, in the world of public figures, it's becoming increasingly normal. Celebrities, politicians, and tech CEOs all operate in similar ecosystems. They rely on circles of influence, controlled leaks, and legal fortification to maintain dominance. What makes Meghan's case unique is how seamlessly she adapted those tools from Hollywood into royal warfare. And Harry, for all his military training and royal pedigree, is playing catch-up in a game he never wanted to play. In the next section, we'll explore one of the most critical components of Meghan's strategy, the question of a prenup. Did Harry protect himself before walking down the aisle? Or did love blind him to the reality of what could come? Because if there's no prenup, then everything, every dollar, every property, every deal, is now in the hands of California law and Meghan's formidable machine. Tonight, shocking revelations shake the royal world as Meghan Markle allegedly blackmails Prince Harry with a massive divorce threat, $150 million, or face public exposure over rumored infidelity. But behind the headlines lies a deeper, more disturbing truth: secret emails, carefully timed legal moves, and a calculated media machine designed to bury the Duke in scandal. Was this betrayal years in the making? And does Meghan hold recordings powerful enough to destroy Harry's reputation forever? Stay with us. What we've uncovered will leave you speechless.